My colleague right now, Rishika Barua, caught up with Amy Casman of the Financial Times to know how the United States, the media of the United States, is reacting to this news.
As the diplomatic row between India and the United States escalates, to put some perspective into this issue, I have with me Amy Casman from the Financial Times. Amy, not very good times, diplomatically, India and US at the brink of a huge standoff. How do you see this panning out?
I think this is all very, very unfortunate. U.S.-India relations had already been losing momentum since the kind of headiness of post-civil nuclear deal environment. And I think it's a real shame that this incident, which raises larger questions, has become so heated and emotional. There are obviously important issues that need to be sorted out between India and the U.S. on some of these questions, like Indian diplomats bringing Indian staff, domestic staff with them on assignment to the U.S., how this diplomat was treated, whether it was a violation of the Vienna Convention. I think these are issues that need to be negotiated carefully at the highest level, and I think it's sad that it seems to have become incredibly emotional and people are just making this out into being an issue of national pride.
Well, it seems like, the Indian politicians, the Indian parliament has taken it upon itself to sort this matter out, has decided to take a very tough stance on the issue. How do you think this is going to, do you think this is going to escalate? How do you see this turning out in the next couple of days?
I don't know exactly how this will play out. One can only hope that calm will return and cooler counsel will prevail and that, there will be able to be some kind of negotiations to resolve this. But I do think it does highlight an important kind of cultural clash between two very big democracies, but that still have very different priorities in some aspects. I think in the U.S., there's a very high priority on the rule of law, no matter who you are and how big you are. The rule of law applies to you, whereas I think that in India there is a kind of a culture where people in positions of power expect to be able to be treated in certain ways, even with such phenomenon as anticipatory bail. So I think there's a clash that way, and at the same time there's a real clash obviously on labor and treatment of labor and what's considered a fair and decent treatment of labor. This issue of how Indian diplomats are treating their domestic staff while on assignment in the U.S. has been a recurring issue for the Indian government. And I would think that really one should think about how perhaps best to avoid these kinds of issues from happening in the future. We all have to be respectful of each other's cultural sensitivities, and I think maybe there needs to be some sensitivity of how these are perceived and play out in America when you have domestic staff getting paid at certain levels and being treated in a certain way that perhaps here would be considered more acceptable.
Amy, you're an American journalist living in New Delhi. We saw yesterday that the security checkposts from the American embassy were removed. Do you fear, some kind of a backlash here back in India?
I certainly hope not. I'm not expecting it. As I said, I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail. I think there are important issues that this case has apparently highlighted in the relationship between the US and India. These are two great democracies. They should have, strong relations in the long run, and it would be sad to see this kind of incidents blow up out of proportion. And I will hope that it does get resolved appropriately.
Well, attributing it to cultural difference and hoping that this issue in fact does get resolved peacefully and cooler calm prevails between the United States and India. That was Amy Casman talking to us from the Financial Times. With camera person Ankur, this is Rishika Barua in New Delhi for Headlines Today.